When cutting up your character, or even creating your character so that it can be animated, it's important to think about it in terms of layers and how you're going to organize those layers and how you're going to nest those layers so that it serves our purposes for animating. So as we do this, depending on how you get your artwork into Harmony, you may create it directly in Harmony, you may have drawn it with pencil or pen or markers on paper and then digitize that. You can bring it in as a picture and trace over the top of it. So there's any number of ways that you can go about doing it. But then once you do that, you need to start thinking about colors and layers. For every body part that you are going to move independently, it needs to be on its own layer. Now, I like to create all of my layers first and think through what are the layers I'm going to use, and then after I do that, I'm able to start creating the artwork on those individual layers. So I've created all of my layers. I've also, ahead of time, created my colors. So I've created a whole set of colors that I'm going to use as part of my character. Now, one thing that is useful when we do this is to make sure that as we are creating our colors, naming them with the character that they're part of can be beneficial. Now, there are some ways where we can have separate color palettes for each character, but if we just have one color palette per scene, which is one way of working, we need to make certain that the colors as we create them have unique names, because then when we take and combine multiple characters into a single scene, we want our colors to be unique to those characters. So the easiest way to make that happen is to put the character name in the color name when you create the color. That will prevent difficulties later, because if you make a color and just call it head or skin, you have three characters and they each have three separate skins, that could be problematic of, well, which skin is this? And the software might get confused, or you might get confused. So it's much better to name your colors with your character name. It also is useful to name your layers with some designation of which character they are part of. In this case, I just used the letter N to represent my ninja, because then the body parts that are going on each of those layers are longer names. So that allows me to control my naming. Now within the naming, I've created layers. I have a head layer. Then I have one eye, I have another eye, I have a body, I have a hand, an arm, a hand, an arm, leg, foot, and foot. Now, when creating these and drawing the artwork on each of the layers, I find it's useful to turn on the light table so then it grays out the layer that is not the current active layer, so that I don't accidentally start drawing artwork for one body part on the wrong layer. So that's a way to simplify the workflow so that you're able to stay on top of it a little bit more, because when you get 10 to 30 layers or more for one character, if you can find something that's going to help you, that's definitely going to be to your advantage. The layer configuration. If you add layers and you realize the layers, you're missing one, like originally I forgot to put in a face layer, so I had the body layer, the head layer, but I need, the head is kind of a mask, so that I have eyes that are in between that I can then move around, because I want to be able to take those eyes that we have, and with the eyes, perhaps if we grab an eye, I may want to move that eye around within the head. And as I want to do, well, probably not out here, because that would be, maybe if he got really scared, his eyes pop out of his head, and we could do that. But we can see that we're seeing the body through that hole. If I turn off the body layer, you can see there's that gap. So when I originally created this, I forgot that I needed a face layer. So now the face layer, if I turn off the head, we can see all it is just a blob of flesh. That will be the flesh part in by the eyes. But also when I made the face layer, because it was added after, I now realize I forgot to name it correctly and forgot to put the N in. So we're able to create all of the layers and see with Lightbox how much, or Light Table, how much easier it is to tell what is the current active layer as you work your way through. And that will help. Now if I look at the arms and legs, we can see that they're not a closed shape, but that they're open on the end. And part of that is trying to now decide from an animation standpoint, do I want the arm on top of the body or behind the body? Because when the body's on right now, I can see how I have this line or this gap, which if I were to grab, say, the right arm and want to move that right arm around, so, well, I missed. Try again. So if I wanted to move that right arm, you can see how we would have some range of motion, but not complete. And part of it will be deciding, as part of the animation, how far you want it to move. Now, if the same arm, as we look at it here, if that arm were on top of the body, so we pull the arm on top of the body, we can see how it gives a different quality to the animation and just to the artwork by having it here. Now, looking at this, I may want to go grab my paintbrush on the arm and add in a little bit more. So as the arm moves, we don't get the gap showing. Move the pivot point to the shoulder, so now the arm can move quite a bit. It can go all the way down. And it can go up to here, because then we run out space. So he's not very flexible in the shoulders yet. And it's going to take some work to figure out what is the range of motion this character is capable of, and how do we need to create or construct the artwork to allow it to work best. Because the body parts aren't established with a true parent-child relationship, as I move the arm, the hand isn't going with it, so that's problematic, so we need to fix that. Now, you will notice one thing that happened is as I moved it, using the animation tools, I used rotate, I modified the position, so I used the transform tool. These animation tools introduce keyframes. So I'm not actually changing the artwork. All I'm doing is setting a keyframe. And the nice part about that is I can now go to that keyframe right there, and the function key F7 deletes the keyframe. So that's a really easy way, or I could right click on it and get rid of the keyframe. But now I got the artwork back to where I need it. So the question that I'm going to be left with is, do I want my limbs behind? So like this arm here, so if I move the pivot point up to the shoulder, then move the arm, do I want the arm behind? Again, seeing I need to do something to the artwork to cover the gaps, or do I want it in front like the other arm? And I could do one of each for experiment purposes to see what works best when I start working with the character. So there isn't a hard and fast rule of, well, the body should be in front, the arms should be behind, or the arms and legs should be in front. It really does depend on the artwork and on the individual character that you're working with for how you end up structuring your layers. But what I do want to do is at least build the relationship that I want the hand to be a child of the arm. And to do this, I just take the hand layer and I drag it, not till I see the line on it, but I drag it on top of the layer. So I take left hand and I drag it onto left arm, and it makes it a child. If I drag down until I see the blue line, that indicates it's just going to put it below it. So it's just changing the layer order. It's not creating a parent-child relationship. But I want that parent-child relationship, so then that hand goes to my right hand and right arm, left hand and left arm are now parented. And then I can do the same thing with the feet, so that my left foot is going to become part of the left leg, my right foot will become part of the right leg. So now in doing that, if I were to grab the right arm and set its pivot point at the shoulder, I can go to the left arm. The pivot point was set previously. Now, if I go and set the pivot point for the leg at the hip there, go to my other leg and set the pivot point here, now the leg can move. Again, we can see I may want to adjust or change my artwork to allow for greater flexibility when animating. So the limbs are set. Now I have the head, the two eyes, and the face. So I want two eyes and the face to become a child of the head. I'm going to put the pivot point for the head, what would be about at the base of the neck. So if the head were, I moved the wrong pivot point. Put the pivot point for the head. So now the head can move, because he doesn't really have a neck, being a little blueberry ninja. But at least now we can get a sense of that positioning. So the next step will be to start to clean up some of my artwork. Now looking at my left leg, one thing that I noticed, and if I switch into my light table view, is when I move the leg, I'm just going to move the leg here. So it moves down. What I could do, seeing how this looks, is I could now go back to my paintbrush and grab my stroke. I paid attention when I started that my paintbrush for all strokes was set to 20. So when I was working on drawing the outlines, the tool was set at 20. So that's good to remember that. So now if I run this line up, now if I go back to the rotate tool and rotate it out, you can see I think instead of having it extend down like that, what I want to do is run it here, do a little bit of erasing on the stroke right there. Oh. And now that I've done that, I can paint it in. There is now where I can draw a stroke, and it gives me a message and says, you've added a stroke, but it won't be visible. I'm like, that's fine. Say okay. The advantage of doing that is now if I grab my paint bucket and hit fill, it fills that whole shape. So I don't have to have a line around that edge. So that's a really useful item that we can do. Going back to the rotate tool. So now if his leg moves, we can see, all right, I might even run it a little bit more so he can bend his leg, because it's like he's bent his knee. His leg is straight and now his knee is bent, but it's going behind his body. Taking advantage of his circular geometry. All right. Any questions so far? Feel confident you could bang out your own character now? Maybe? Okay. So, the next thing to do with your character is to start building the layers and building the artwork for your character. We're not going to worry about alternative drawings yet, because we will be doing that next week, because we will be working on creating the different mouth shapes that your character needs for talking. So for your character to speak, we need to create 8 different mouth shapes that correspond to the phonetic sounds of spoken language. And the cool part, it's not unique to English. So these mouth shapes correspond to sound. To make specific sounds, our mouth has to take a specific shape. If you feed dialogue into the tool in a different language, it's listening for phonetic sounds. It's not listening for words. So your character can be speaking any language you want, and it works. What?
Just seeing something about.
So, something to keep in mind. So do think about, as you construct your character's head, there will be a mouth layer. Your mouth layer may include a chin, or the mouth will be moving entirely separate from the rest of the face. So he has a mouth. The chin doesn't move, just the mouth is moving. The hair moves though, because the hair is separate, because it's alive. Now if we were to take a look at the character and look in the head, we can see where he's got bangs, hair, some fanciness going on for the eyes. The eyebrows are actually separate, so they can be animated independently. And now if I look at the mouth, we'll see that the mouth has I'm just trying to get it a little bit bigger so we can see. So the mouth has different shapes associated with it. So depending on what sound he's trying to make, mouth takes on a different shape. So this character, as like in this particular view, it would probably be beneficial if I added the chin onto the mouth and extended it so it looks like the jaw is moving. So as you plan out your character, keep in mind, like the upper lip and upper teeth, they're connected to the skull. The jaw and lower teeth are not. So as you speak, that mouth, as it opens, it's moving, but the upper part is never moving independent from the head because it's attached. Now, if you have some sort of alien physiology in your character, I'll let you figure out, what you want to do with that, so you can plan appropriately.